back to Kim Reads as we continue with Hunchback of Notre Dame. Chapter 8 The Rat Hole. The building to the west of the square had once been owned by a lovely young woman who had become very sad after her father died in the war. She mourned him by closing up the house and living in a tiny room on the first floor. When she died, she left her house behind for the sole purpose of being a place of mourning. The small room, closed up and dark except for a window with bars and no glass, was known around the square as the Rat Hole. An old hag called the Sack Woman lived inside. On the day Quasimodo went to the stocks, two women were talking toward the rat hole. One of them, Anne, was the mayor's wife. The second, Sophie, was her cousin from the country. Sophie held her son's hand. His name was Eustace, and he was carrying a cake for the old woman. "Come on, Sophie," Anne said. "We don't want to be late. My husband said the hunchback would only be in the stocks for an hour. That doesn't leave us much time to do our good deed and give the cake to the sack woman." On their way, the two ladies gossiped about the events of the day before. "Wait," Sophie said. "What's that?" In the distance, a woman could hear a tambourine. "It must be the gypsy Esmeralda, playing and dancing with her goat," Anne answered. "Quick, let us go see. I bet little Eustace would like it very much." "A gypsy!" Sophie stopped in her tracks. "No, she might steal my boy. Come, Eustace." Sophie pulled her son along behind her as she ran toward the Place de Grève. Finally, when she could no longer run, she stopped. Soon Anne caught up behind her. "Goodness, what's the matter?" "What do you mean the gypsy will steal your boy?" Sophie just shook her head. "You know," Anne said, "come to think of it, the old sack woman in the rat hole thinks the same of the gypsies." "Really?" Sophie asked. "Why, yes," Anne answered. "I heard about it just the other day." You see, I would not wish the fate of Paquette on anyone," Sophie said. "Who's that?" Anne asked. I've never heard of Paquette. You must tell me the story." Paquette was a young woman from Reims who suffered a terrible tragedy when she was just 18. Her father died when she was small, and even though she came from a good family, she and her mother were very poor. A few years later, her mother's death, Paquette gave birth to a baby girl. The baby's name was Agnes, and Paquette placed all of her hopes and dreams upon her. The girl was even more beautiful than Paquette. Then one day the gypsies came to Reims. They had come to tell the fortunes, but they were banned from the city, so they camped on the outskirts. Of course, the entire town went to see them. Paquette wanted to know what would happen to her daughter, so she carried her off to see the gypsies. The fortune teller said she'd be queen and a great beauty. Paquette was overjoyed. The next day, she left Agnes asleep for just a moment while she went to tell a neighbor the good news. When she returned, she was surprised not to hear a baby crying. "Maybe she's asleep," Paquette thought. But when she opened the door to the room, Agnes was gone. Paquette rushed downstairs crying, "Someone has stolen my child!" The only thing left behind was a tiny satin shoe. Okay, see, in order for that to work, someone would have had to have been following her and watching her. The street was empty, and no one asked had she seen a girl. As Paquette returned to her room, she heard a baby's cry. "Why, it must be Agnes," she thought. But it wasn't. She opened the door to find a one-eyed, deformed, limping baby. A little monster who looked about 4 years old. Paquette screamed and ran back inside. "The gypsies have stolen my baby and replaced her with a monster," she cried. Everyone in Reims went out to find Agnes, but the gypsies were gone. About 2 miles out of town, they found one of the girl's ribbons. The very next day, Paquette's hair turned gray. The day after that, she disappeared. Sophie finished her tale and looked at her cousin. Anne was very pale. "I can see why you're afraid of gypsies," she said. "No one knows what happened to Paquette. Some say she drowned in the river. Others say she walked to Paris barefoot." "What happened to the gypsy monster?" Anne asked. "Did he drown with Paquette?" "No, not at all," Sophie said. "Someone left him at Notre Dame. Our archdeacon felt very sorry for him and blessed him and left him live there." The trio had arrived at the Place de Grève. People caught up in the excitement of Paquette's story, they had forgotten who was in the stocks. When they realized it was Quasimodo, they stopped dead. He was the gypsy monster from the story. If it hadn't been for Eustace tugging on his mother's arm, asking if he could eat the cake, they would have stood there frozen in shock. Oh, we almost forgot about the rat hole, Sophie said quickly. Come, let us go now and bring the poor woman cake. We don't need to watch this. Anne and Sophie walked over to the other side of the square and stood in front of the window of the rat hole. They stood on their toes and looked outside. The dark room held a skinny woman with gray hair. She was curled up with her hands around her knees. It was very cold in the room, and she had no winter clothes. We shouldn't bother her, Sophie said. You know, I can imagine Paquette in a place like this, pushing herself because of what happened to her beautiful girl. Anne said. Just then, Sophie saw a child's shoe in the room. She gasped. Look, it's the child's shoe, the tiny satin shoe. It is Paquette. Anne cried out. Eustace said, Mother, please, can I eat the cake? The boy's voice woke the sack woman from her trance. Is that a child I hear? Take him away. Take him before the gypsies come. She crawled on her knees toward the shoe, then sighed and collapsed. A commotion broke out around the stocks, and it rose the sack woman. She rushed to the widow and shouted, Aha, it must be the gypsy who calls me. She stretched out both of her thin arms between the bars and shouted, So it is you, gypsy woman, you child stealer, curse you, and curse all of you. Sophie screamed, and she and Anne ran away, pulling Eustace behind them. Okay, that's it for that chapter. See you later.